Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Jackson. I'm chairman of the Continuing Medical Education Committee for Houston Methodist System, and I want to welcome everybody to this very prestigious lecture. This is the 15th Michael E. DeBakey lecture here at Houston Methodist, and I'm so grateful that our distinguished panelists have agreed to participate. All three have given the DeBakey lecture in the past. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Alan Lumsden, who will be the chief moderator. Alan, please, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jackson. I'm not entirely sure whether to say thank you, and this is a great idea. Give me an hour and we'll figure out whether this is a great idea or the worst idea that you've ever had. But it is a historic occasion. My job is to introduce them and then try to moderate it. And so these guys don't need any introduction. So I'm not going to use what we've got because I want to hear what they've got to say. First of all, I want them all to raise their right hand and repeat after me. Everything I say today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You agree? Second thing is, I just want to remind everybody, this is the DeBakey lecture this morning. The Cooley lecture, Dr. Fraser is next door, so we're going to talk about DeBakey primarily this morning. So let me just introduce them from near to far. Dr. Ken Maddox, again, no introduction necessary for any of them. These are all experts in their own right. Dr. Maddox is a legendary trauma surgeon, the chief surgeon over at Ben Taub. That's when he and I worked together basically at Baylor College of Medicine. And he has some strong opinions about a lot of things that have happened in the medical center. Next to him is Dr. Safi. When he first immigrated from Iraq, he was here at Methodist Hospital, worked as part of the DeBakey group, and then moved off to University of Texas. And now he's over at Park Plaza and is responsible for the entire aortic program with HCA nationwide. And next to him is Dr. Bud Frazier. And Bud, whose son works at Methodist, Todd, everyone knows him. Bud basically also started working here, moved over to Texas Heart. We're not going to go into that in any great detail. And is well known basically for his work on artificial devices for left ventricular assist devices and more recently the artificial heart. And so those are the protagonists who we've got on stage this morning. And what we're going to do is start off and give each of them 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about their journey. How did they end up in Houston? How did they end up interacting with Dr. DeBakey? And then we're going to get into some specific questions after that. And we've got microphones around. This is going to be, at some point in time, we'll open it up because there's a lot of people, actually have a lot more experience than I had in working with these gentlemen and working with Dr. DeBakey, and I'm sure they're going to have some probing questions. So that's the introduction. Dr. Maddox, tell us a little bit about your journey, sir.
I first saw Dr. DeBakey in 1958 when I was in college and presented a paper at the Texas Collegiate Academy of Science in the Baylor building. He left his motor running when he came from Methodist to Baylor so that he wouldn't waste any time and had somebody guarding his car. I thought, how silly. He showed us a movie, and I later, in 1960, came as a medical student. Our clinical rotations were the last 2 years. I saw him there, rotated. I was an intern, rotated on his service then, went off 2 years in the Army, came back and did residency in general thoracic surgery, where I had rotations at Methodist, of course. I interacted with him as I was chairman of the IRB later, and when I finished my residency, George Rule had been deputy chief of surgery at the Ben Taub, and because he went over and worked with Denton, it opened up a job, and Dr. DeBakey said, "Would you go help George?" And I said, "Sure." And I never left, and my whole career was there. And so then I interacted with him in my staff position at the Ben Taub. More to say about that later. And you ask about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I swear on a stack of DeBakey reprints we will do that.
All right, Dr. Safi, from Baghdad to Houston.
Well, as our American soldier called Baghdad, Texas on the Tigris, and I came to Baghdad on the Bayou, which is Houston. That's the other name for Houston. Actually, I was not planning to be even a surgeon. We go from high school to medical school. And in February, we were a group in senior high went to go to see the anatomy hall, and I came and changed my mind and became in medical school. I met Dr. Yusuf Naman, who was trained with Dr. DeBakey in the 50s. And he was like the guru of cardiac surgery in Iraq. And DeBakey came and visited him in December of '74. And I was a resident there, and he introduced me to him. And out of 3 senior residents, I want you to take Hazem with you to Texas. Of course, it created a lot of ill feeling by my surroundings. They wanted to kill me. And he told me in the airport of the city of Baghdad airport to come to the airplane, and he said, I will get you. And the December '75 came and nothing happened. And I teased my mentor, Yusuf Naman, who is a heavyweight lifter. He can lift 44 pounds with one arm, so you don't mess with that guy. And I told him, your American friends promise you things, nothing happened. So I took my primary FRCS of the Royal College of Surgeons of England, and I cut my ticket to go to England in April of '76. I received a letter, and it's Hazem J. Safi, Medical City, Baghdad, India, December '74. Without this Indian postal office, which is one of the best in the world, you'd not have seen me. I would have been in London cussing Dr. DeBakey till the day he died, and probably he's cussing me why this whippersnapper from Baghdad didn't show up. And that's how I came, and they offered me cardiovascular fellow and what's the other one, an instructor in surgery. I told them, well, I need to have an American Board of Surgery. I don't understand this. And Arthur Bell, who is a friend of my mentor, was a nice man, took me with him to George Jordan, the late George Jordan. And I made the misfortune, tell him it's a waste of my time to go a cardiovascular fellow. And he let me have it for half an hour, a lecture. I told him, I'm with you, whatever you say is correct, but if I go home back, my mom said, he went to the bar and chased skirts. That's what I told him. He looked at me so I was passionate. He told me, can you come next year? I told him, okay. So I went next year. I went to England to do my requirement for FRCS and came back September 10th, '77, left to Houston and stayed here. But first encounter as an attending staff, we'll talk about it later.
Okay, but before you tell us your story, before I got accused of being biased as a moderator, having your picture up here the entire time, let's go run the little video that you brought for us. Can we go ahead and run the video?
You know, we're going to do one of those.
Oh, back to the beginning, huh?
No, we need to turn it on.
You run it again? If not, okay, just hold it off a moment. We'll come back to that. Go ahead, bud. Tell us your story.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Well, I went to medical school just because I didn't want to teach 7th grade English like my mother. And I couldn't think of anything to do. My mother was my main advisor, and she said, you can do anything you want to as long as you don't cheat, lie, or steal. And I couldn't think of much. I'd never thought about going to medical school, but I thought at least I was reading a lot of Chekhov. At that time, I was an English history major. And I decided, well, medical school, you don't have to cheat, lie, or steal. And so I gave up my law school appointment. I already had started law school study. And I came to Baylor. And my first encounter with Dr. DeBakey was, as a medical student, we had to do research projects, but which was very good. Baylor was a small school, 75 in the class, and and I always waited the last minute to do anything. And we had to have a research project every year. So the first year, we had to tell what that was going to be by November the 1st. Now, November the 1st came on October the 30th, rather. I had a classmate and a fraternity brother of mine at Texas named Frank Polk, who was a smart guy, as far from me as you could get. He was very organized, did everything. And we had to have our research project in by November the 1st. And he stopped me on October the 30th at the elevator that's still there in the Jewish research booth. And he said, what are you doing for your research? And I said, oh, I hadn't thought about it. I got another day. And he said, I knew you wouldn't have done anything. I've signed you up to help me with Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Leota. We're making an artificial heart. And I said, well, why not? You know? And so that's how I got into this whole racket.
All right.
Anyway, one last stab at Dr. DeBakey, because when we rotated on his service, our orientation, we spent 18 weeks on surgery and 18 weeks on medicine when I was a medical student. And our third year we came over here, and our orientation was to get to the OR on time. And that was it. There was nothing about anything else except Dr. DeBakey would really get upset if you weren't there. Well, that's game enough. And so the first day, Monday, surgery's supposed to start at 7:30, so I wandered in at 7:15, and they'd already started the case because they didn't tell me the lumbar sympathectomy started at 7. And George Noon was in there, and he said, get in here, Dr. DeBakey's already been looking for you. And so I got in there, and then Dr. DeBakey comes in. He just looks in. I'm getting my gown on. And he says, I wonder where medical student Frazier could be this morning. He had always talked with a deep Southern accent informally. I wonder where medical student Frazier could be this morning. I just wonder where he could be. It's my understanding that he doesn't want to be a doctor at all. He wants to be a banker so he can get up at 9 o'clock every morning, a Republican banker. And then I made I really felt I was finished then, and he was out scrubbing later in the morning. I went out to talk to him, and I learned you never do that. You never ask Dr. DeBakey a question in that era. And I said, Dr. DeBakey, I'm sorry, I thought that the case started at 7:30, so that's why I was late. And he said, and he was scrubbing, and he turned over to me. He said, yeah, well, that's good. But if you cared, you would have been here at 6. You would have seen the patient and seen his anxieties, noticed what the anesthesia was doing. If you cared, of course, that's what you do, but clearly you don't care, so it doesn't really matter, So I learned never to try to apologize for anything. The only good discourse you had with Dr. DeBakey at that era was nothing.
All right, let's see if we can run the video.
We're going to do one of those animals with dual micromed pumps tomorrow. I didn't know what your schedule was, if you could come over and would like to see part of it, or... Okay. Well, I'll have, Matthias Loby I've talked to, he could bring you over. All right.
He's very interested in the continuous flow total artificial heart. Dr. DeBakey told me...
Some way to identify
He told me by 1980 there'd be 100,000 Americans with artificial hearts.
If you don't mind, huh? Oh, right. Yeah. So this is a Dacron, I take Dacron down to the dry cleaners and sew it
That
in
was
a
about
little towel.
1965.
And I mount it on a piece of styrofoam, take silicone around it, and then put fiberglass on it, more silicone and fiberglass.
That's Dacron on the interior.
Yeah, Dacron polyester, just like you.
Now, I'll tell you a funny story about that.
And you can see on the inside.
Listen to this.
In fact, I got him a job in Indianapolis. And of course, he was a vascular surgeon. And like me, he got the idea of using nylon.
Nylon.
Now, I went down to the department store to get nylon, and they were fresh out to show you how Providence works. And that's the first time that I heard about Dacron. The clerk said, well, we got a new material called Dacron. And I bought a yard of it. Now, Harry Schumacher went down to the same store in Indianapolis, and he had the misfortune that they had plenty of it. and they sold him a yard, and he wasted 2 years of experience in the lab with nylon.
Nylon didn't work, but Dacron did, and that was a famous
We're
story.
going to do one of those.
That's enough of that.
Okay, so
But Cooley, the other thing I wanted to show there that was inordinately cut off was that was the first time that he spoke with Cooley. Cooley came down to the lab, and they spoke not for 30 years. They spoke at each other, and they just talked about chit chat. You know, they talked about some old residents. Dr. DeBakey remembered the name of one that Dr. Cooley couldn't think. You know, they're both in their 90s. Anyway.
all right, so let's kind of move on. Let me ask some questions here. So I was at a recent meeting, and it was a CV surgery meeting, and there was a whole session dedicated to compassionate leadership. And I thought, well, that's a great topic to bring to this particular grand rounds. And when I look around and see people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and in our world, Dr. DeBakey, we're not renowned for compassionate leadership, and yet they transformed our world. So tell me a little bit about compassionate leadership. Is it towards mediocrity, or do you think it needs to be a little bit more command and control to make the kind of changes that these gentlemen actually made? Dr. Maddox?
Yes. No, in truth, if you assembled 1,000 surgeons in a room, the world's largest concentration of mass raw ego, and ask them the three most famous surgeons in the world that have no problem with the first, they all would have problems with the second and third because they were the only ones that were there. But they all have compassion, but it's expressed in a total different way. And even among the people in this room, they respond to stress, they respond to teaching, research, failure, success in a whole different way. I think compassion is part of our genome, whether it's dealing with the education of medical students, training of residents, dealing with the Texas Medical Board or whatever. So yes, it's there, but it's not mediocrity. We may say we're looking at mediocrity, but we're trying to find a better way. There's always a better way, and I think we're all in there to find that better way.
Dr. Safy, I'm sure you can comment.
Well, the best example of compassion is this man. He forego making riches. He worked all years to help us to be a good surgeon. And I still remember in one of these nights in Houston in the late 70s, where I was in charge of the operating room, and we have 5 operating going. I don't have even medical student to run the 5th room. Somehow, like a ghost, he came. He said, "Where do you want me to go?" Instead of ordering me, he asked me to tell him where to go. So, you know, all of us has compassion. Some people on the left, on the right, they try to make it as the demagogue. I'm a secular man. Everybody knows that. Its empathy is ingrained in us, in our DNA. And it's all of us, when you see somebody broke his legs, you will, Theismann, when he broke his his leg, I cringed. So I think whatever our motive, we can use it, but you cannot go for mediocrity if you are a nice guy. You have to set the standard. And DeBakey also set the standard. It's fascinating that he has probably a galaxy of stars with him. Each one of them can be a chairman anywhere, and they stay with him. Why? Because he was a leader.
Well, Dr. DeBakey, when I was with him as an intern and a resident, he would have 80 to 100 patients in the hospital. Now, how do you deal with that? He would make rounds in the ICU every day, every morning. I was in the ICU 4.5 months. Never saw the light of day. This is about as bright as it got. There was one window in the back, and you had to spend 3 months, but the guy ahead of me got fired, which was a very common thing in those days. And Dr. DeBakey would see every patient in the ICU every morning at 5:30, and he was there at 5:30 every morning. Didn't matter if he was operating till 4 o'clock in the morning. He's the most disciplined person that I've ever seen. And he just didn't have time. He was just so limited in his time. But the one thing that really impressed me, that nobody else did this, is if you had a death, he talked to the family. He talked to the family, and that was one of the many ways you could get fired if you tried to go around him for that. And he was on a one-to-one basis, I thought, wonderful with the families, particularly in dire circumstances such as that.
Let me give you an example. I had the same ICU rotation, and one day we got a notice that Dr. DeBakey had canceled his schedule for 3 days, and the word was he went to Washington. And so there was no operating from his service, but the patients went on. Finally, after about 3 days, the nurse came to me and said, Dr. DeBakey wants to see you. And I said, isn't he in Washington? No, come with me. So she led me into a back room that was off limits to me as a resident. And she opened the door, and here was a Dr. DeBakey sitting at the bedside, being a special duty nurse and a special duty doctor to Mr. Bentob, who had had a massive stroke. And he looked up and said, Ken, I didn't even know he knew my name. He said, Ken, I'm a little tired after 3 days of no sleep. I wonder if you could take care of Mr. Taub while I go get a little rest, because I'm exhausted. And he said, before I go, let me give you a progress note. And here he gave me told me what all the drips were, what he had done. I looked, he had written notes about all of this, and Bentob, who was a very close friend, he had great compassion for. Bentob ultimately had a home. He lived in this building for another 2 years, and once a week they would make rounds together. And but it was that compassion I saw in that room where he had canceled his schedule. He had canceled everything to take care of this man who was that close to him. And then it did my ego a great deal when he trusted me to take care of, to continue what he had started. That's compassion.
So, Dr. Safy, we kind of wandered into one of the questions, and that was the ICU experience and preparing for rounds with Dr. DeBakey. I'm sure you've got a few comments to make.
Well, it's you don't go home for 60 days. They were a little bit mellowed in our time, not 60 days.
Bunch of pansies.
Yeah, and he comes in the morning at 6:30, not 5, and you make round around the patients. He has a 20 to 25, but he has his own special chart you have to fill, the potassium. If the potassium is less than 4, you're done. I mean, he will kick you out. I mean, you're done. And so I always be prepared to walk him around, and he does a lot of these high-risk patients. And I still remember one case where Dr. DeBakey did a mitral valve repair on a patient with Hodgkin disease. Her liver enzyme is sky high. Started in the morning, came at 4:30, and it was bleeding. And somehow somebody told him that the patient's coming back because Dr. Safi didn't give enough blood. So I lived under dictatorship with Saddam, so I told the nurses never to move the bag of blood between 4:30 till 5. When he come to you without his white coat, mean he's going to fire you. So he came without white coat, and he saw me squeezing the 10th one. He looked, why he's bleeding? And I told him this, he went back. And the guy who told him Dr. Safi did not, or Hazem did not give blood, came and told me, why did you tell that Dr. Safi? I told him, well, it's your back, is not my back. He will fire me if I don't tell that. But he is also understand the human psyche. I was 6 weeks, and it's really rough because he has 20 patients, and he had a lumbar spectrum. We used to do lumbar spectrum. Somehow she died. She's 87. He did lumbar spectrum. After a week, she died. At that time, I didn't give a damn whether can I say the damn here?
Yeah, you can.
I said, if he fired me, fire me. So he came, and he told me, Dr. Safi, I told him, why she died. And I was psychotic. When you go 3 or 4 days without sleep, you become psychotic. I looked at him, I told him, Dr. DeBakey? He said, yes. She died. And he left. He said, this guy's a nut. Or firing me. But, he had a great impact on me, and I'm thankful the Indian Postal Office for being here. Otherwise, a bullet was waiting for me in Baghdad, in my head. It's really, you learn from him. He's the happiest moment in the operating room. He's happiest moment when he see and talk to patients.
Very good. Yeah, I must admit, I'll come to you in a minute, but I'd heard about this ICU. It was legendary across the country, urban legend. Of course, it didn't exist. And that there were red lines on the entrance and the exit to the ICU where you were told, don't step over this in the next 2 months. And about a week after I arrived down there, I'm standing in front of an ICU, and I look down, and there are the red lines
Is it
across
true?
the door.
He
So,
fired people for that.
Bud, did you have the ICU experience?
What was the question?
Dr. Frazier, did you have the ICU
The
experience?
question, there is the red line you can't cross.
There was no red line.
There was? There was a red line.
You just stayed there the whole time. I don't know what you were talking about. You never got out. There's one thing I want to say to this group, though, just because it's a real cause for reflection for me, is I had to cover as an intern because the resident that was supposed to be covering left. And Dr. DeBakey had operated on a man named Schwartz from New York. And Schwartz had a fem pop. It was a straightforward fem pop. And it clotted. Then he did it a second time and it clotted. And then in the middle of the night, after I'd been up all night the night before, about 2 a.m., the nurse called and said, Schwartz's leg is cold again. So that meant you had to go tell Dr. DeBakey. He didn't carry a beeper. You had to know where he was. And I knew he was in his office by then. So I went to his office and you couldn't say, Schwartz has clogged his graft again. That would get you fired. You had to know your lines. And the line was, Dr. DeBakey, I'm worried about Schwartz, and I wish you would come see him. And he got mad. But he got on the elevator with me, and this is an elevator that's no longer around, but it had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I punched 7 because I was so tired, and then I hit 8. And he looked up, there's just the two of us on the elevator. And he said, "Who punched 7?" Who punched 7? Now I'm going to have to go to 7, and I don't want to go to 7. The patients are on 8. And I said, "Yes, sir, I know they're on 8. Well, why did you punch 7? Because we don't have a single patient on 7. They're all on 8. And anyway, so he beat me up pretty badly on that. But we get to Schwartz's bedside, and his leg was cold. And for some reason, as I said, it was an axiom in those days. You never asked Dr. Baker a question. That was just trouble. But I was thinking to myself, I wonder why it keeps clotting. But I said it. I said, I wonder why it keeps clotting. And he looked up outside. So he said, do you understand Virchow's triad? Do you know anything about anything? Virchow's triad, when blood stops moving, it clots. And I said, yes, sir, I know that. He said, repeat after me. When blood stops moving, it clots. So, and I never heard him do this, and I never heard him do it again. And I said, sir, and he said, you heard me, repeat after me. When blood stops moving, it clots. And I said, when blood stops moving, it clots. Then he's pounced on your chest and tells you, and don't forget it. Years later, I was working on the LVADs. Let me show you the first slide after that video, if you could do that. Do you know how to do that? Okay, look at that. I came over to work with research because I barely got out of Vietnam alive, and I was going to work on these pumps that I'd gotten started with Dr. DeBakey. The problem with the pump that we were working on with Jack Norman, who was an honor student at Harvard, great guy, the inlet cannula kept clotting off. You see that white thing? That's where the blood comes into the pump. It's about 8 centimeters long. The next one.
Last one.
And it would look like this. It would block off. It would totally block off. And we had a NIH grant, but it was clear that this pump wouldn't work. This happened time and time again. After about 4 weeks, it would clot off. So Dr. Norman, who was a great guy, Harvard-trained, brilliant man, was going to give up the grant. He wasn't going to do any more. And I had just been with him about a year and a half, and I said, Jack, I think the problem is that when the pump pumps, when it's pumping, then the blood in that inlet cannula stops. And Jack, when blood stops moving, it clots. And he said, you're right. Show the next slide.
All right, let's
show the next one. Anyway.
No, that's the last slide we'll show. So let me move on to Hasm.
That's it. I won't say another word.
Yeah,
I promise.
Put that hand up again and keep it up there and say, I
won't
promise
say
on my
another
honor.
But
all right.
but we got rid of the inlet cannula anyway. He doesn't want to. So that's how we ended up, and that was the first device approved by the FDA.
All right.
In 1994, the first LVAD approved. We've implanted over 100,000 LVADs now. Dr. DeBakey said we'd have 100,000 artificial hearts by 1980. He told me that when I was working with the research with.
All right, so everybody repeat after me. If blood stopped moving, very good. Okay, I think we got the message. Hasm, just give me, what's your best remembrance? Funny? Intriguing?
Well, I met Dr. Crawford in February 1983 on the way to go into Saudi Arabia to train. He said, what are you doing after that? I told him, I'll look for a job. He said, don't look for a job. I'll give you a job. Well, I was in Saudi Arabia. He called me in June. You have a job. So I joined Dr. Crawford. And then our department meeting is by invitation. And they have his long table, and you know, I'm like the young guy, I was in the back hiding. And then Dr. DeBakey came a minute or two late, and he looked at me, and he said, there are two things overrated in life. Buying a new car, which is true, the minute you take it, 20% value goes down, and a vacation. So when I went home, I told her, Deborah, no vacation. That's what the message I got. He got you something true, but the other one, vacation, no vacation.
Dr. Maddox?
What was the question?
Question is, what leaps to your mind about experience that you had? What's the most impressionable thing that happened with Dr. DeBakey?
I had the opportunity over my career to be with Dr. DeBakey over his many roles: clinical, management, strategic planning, economic, research, organizational, first editor of the Journal of Vascular Surgery, political, quality. The most fascinating thing was he was a different personality in each of the locations. He was most vitriolic in his expression when he was with family, us. When he was in a room with a donor, and they're all on the Methodist board and the Baylor board, he was the epitome of diplomacy. When he was expressing a death or a complication to a family, he was full of compassion. What I never understood, how he was able to change moods so quickly and so effectively, and then in a leadership role, create institutions that are now all over the medical center. He decided one year early, there's no library here, and the Jesse Jones Library was created. We had a polio epidemic, but there was no place to take care of the physical medicine aspects of the polio, and TIRR was created, which now is the big rehabilitation institute. He looked around one day and I heard him say, we don't have a graduate school, and all of a sudden Melnick was hired and that school developed. So he saw needs and created a solution that were brilliant, sometimes without permission. He created a school of OR techs, and his main OR scrub nurse was a tech. We right now are very short of nurses everywhere, and we need someone who has the ability to say, we're going to fix this in this kind of way. So his versatility, his recognition, and regardless of how he expressed it, he created a new institute whenever that needed to be created. We need that kind of leadership in a number of ways right now.
Well, thank you. So there's 15 minutes to go, and I'm going to kind of open this up for questions. But before we get that, Ken, probably you can answer this question if anybody can. How on earth did he get Baylor College of Medicine to come to Houston?
He did not do that. Dean Morrison did that, and then they started adding faculty. Actually, there was a fight between the Southwestern Foundation and the medical school, and Morrison was dean up there. And the MD Anderson, Mr. Taub, and Mr. Herman were three bachelors living in the Rice Hotel. They had dinner together every night, and they planned the Texas Medical Center and bought it. And then they wanted a medical school to come. They offered the medical school slot to Galveston, and they refused it. They then hired Dr. DeBakey, and there was no hospital around except Herman. They made him chairman of the teaching service, and he went over there and went to the chief of surgery and said, what happens if I find a mistake? You'll find no mistakes here, young man. He said, I'll never run out of clinical material to teach on because there's lots of mistakes here. And they fired him. He called up Alton Oshner and said, I want to come back to New Orleans, not stay in Houston. Alton Oshner said, go talk to Mr. Taub, who is the superintendent of the combined city-county hospital. He asked for 5 minutes. Mr. Taub gave him 5 minutes. He walked in, and on Mr. Taub's desk was this book. This book is the Flexner Report, published in 1910, and medical education in the United States and Canada. Dr. DeBakey said, I noticed the Flexner Report is on your desk. And Mr. Taub said, yes, on page 45 or something. It says, when a medical school and a hospital join, the quality improves. Dr. DeBakey said, yes, it's on such and such a page. They looked it up and there it was. Their conversation was 5 hours and they became hard and fast friends. This book caused Dr. DeBakey to stay in Houston when Mr. Taub talked him into staying because he was fed up. After that, there was a contract with Jefferson Davis, the VA, and then Methodist, and the rest is history as they added people. So this book kept Dr. DeBakey in town.
Awesome. Any questions? Dr. Reardon?
Well, thank you all for being here today. It's really a great pleasure for me. I had the opportunity to be a student under each of you, and without the teaching you guys provided, I would not be here today. You've all been here even longer than I have, so you've seen a lot of changes in the medical center. What's the best and the worst change that you've seen in the time you've been here?
Worst change is the separation of Siamese twins, Methodist and Baylor, and it needs to refuse. And it's egos at the top of the Baylor board and the Methodist board, and we ought to be able to think of a way to bring them back together. That's the worst thing. The best thing is the leaders have allowed for independent development of independent thought of all of the egos that have come up and trained in whatever department, and that still continues in most of the institutions. That's my view. So the thing I'm most proud of is the trainees that have come out of these combined institutions. We actually have the same, all have the same kind of DNA, and it's a great place.
Okay, Dr. Safy?
Well, you know, change is the rule, and every era had its own villain, heroes, inventions. So I don't think I can pinpoint one thing, but I agree with Dr. Maddox that the separation between Baylor and Methodist was tragic, and Dr. DeBakey told me that he didn't like it. It's really one of the reasons pushed me to go to University of Texas, because I knew things are coming, and somehow I went to Methodist. But you know, there is no one thing. The good things is that we have the largest medical center in the world, the best brain in the world are here. A lot of innovation, regardless of who is in charge, Cooley or DeBakey and so on. So I'm optimistic about the future, unless somebody push the button and we will be.
Dr. Frazier, I'm sure you've got an opinion.
Yeah, well, I think this is the largest medical center in the world, which of course I always say when I give my talks. People get tired of Texans saying that. But it is. It's the largest medical center in the world. And that's a great thing for all of us. We've got all these interplay working within the medical center. You've got the best known cancer hospital in the world. We've got a wonderful hospital like Methodist, and St. Luke's is much better. Well, they've got a very great cardiovascular service now. And I think the great thing is it's the largest medical center in the world. The worst thing is it's the largest medical center in the world. And try to get a parking place if you're a patient up here. And I think the other thing is the lack of cooperation. Early on, I tried to bring together Methodist, Herman, and St. Luke's, particularly with the transplants. The largest transplant center in the world it is in Santa Monica, and they do about 80 a year. Before the plague, I added up we do 35, 40 a year, 35, 40 a year here, same at Herman. We do 110 a year. So we could study new drugs, we could study obviously cooperatively, and I think make great contributions. I'm still waiting to see that day though, and I hope most of you will live to see it. I've given up.
Before we run out of time, there's one story that's never been told that I've got to share with you. David Pearce is director of the Houston Fire Department EMS and has a faculty appointment both at UT and Baylor. And we all know the ambulance service of Houston. And David and I have some agreements. We have developed pre-hospital protocols, and depending on what someone has, they go to the public hospital or a private hospital. And we have some codes. And one night, about 11 o'clock, I think it was the night at 11 o'clock, my phone rings and it's David Pearce, and he says, CPR on Cherokee. I said, what? CPR on Cherokee, hurry. And I said, wait a minute, why are you calling me? You're director of EMS, what's going on? And he said, you know that's where Dr. DeBakey lives? And I said, yes. And he said, remember that protocol we got through IRB on the thumper? And the thumper is a device that gets the hands off, the paramedics' hands off, and wraps around the patient and does the pumping for them. And we had a protocol, and we had it approved by FDA that we could have a waiver of consent if people did not want that. They wore a yellow band on their wrist. And he said, you know, we pulled a card and Dr. DeBakey is put the thumper on. And we're almost finished, remember? And we're busting ribs and rupturing hearts, and we're probably not going to put this thing on, but he's CPR yes, or thumper yes. And I said, does he have a wristband? He said, no wristband, but he's old. And I said, old was not a waiver of it was not, don't put it on, put the thumper on. So they put the thumper on, and then Dr. DeBakey was declared dead when he got to Methodist of natural causes. And then David came to see me and said, can we defend this? And I said, well, he had no wristband. And he said, is there something else you can tell me? And I said, yes. When we put this through the IRB, I talked to Dr. DeBakey, and Dr. DeBakey said, you have waiver of consent? Yes. You have a way of educating people? Yes. And he said, Dr. DeBakey said, I think that is an absolute wonderful study. It's prospective, it's randomized, it's waiver of consent, it's pre-hospital. He said, wouldn't it be beautiful to be a member of such be a candidate in such a study? So the very last thing that Dr. DeBakey did before his soul left this planet was to be a randomized participant in a pre-hospital waiver of consent, prospective study that turned out to be, don't use the thumper in the pre-hospital phase. And he had already knew about it, and he predicted, wouldn't it be nice to be a member such a study and be a participant, and he was. And I have permission from the DeBakey family to share that with you. And I'm delighted I had this opportunity.
Thank you. That's a great story. Hazem, you said you had a comment?
Well, to answer my friend Mike, by the way, he was the best surgeon in his class or all classes, so he's dear to me. You know, the reason I think I had a mixed feeling of amalgamating the medical center under one umbrella, because if you don't like your chief who is not for excellence, he can move to another hospital. That's what happened to me. So I think this system is working. It's chaotic, but there is controlled chaos. If you don't like St. Luke's, you come to Methodist. If you don't like Methodist, you go to Memorial. If you don't like Memorial, you come to me. So.
All right. Dr. DeBakey, not only did he train a bunch of surgeons, but he also interacted with cardiologists up and down the line. And so some of them are here, and I really want to hear from Dr. Zogby. I know that you worked with Dr. DeBakey, and almost all of these gentlemen at some point in time or another.
This is an amazing forum, and I want to first thank you for sharing your experiences with Dr. DeBakey from a surgical perspective, from a training perspective, and everything else. The good and at times, friction, if you will, but he meant it in a good way. And Dr. Maddox mentioned his expansive, broad influence. And I think he is a true role model of what a leader can be, because his prowess in surgery and his inventions in surgery transcended into other things. The audience may not know that he was a major national advocate for excellence and funding. He lobbied the NIH, him and Mary Lasker. The Lasker Award is actually named Lasker DeBakey Award. He was on that committee, selection committee, for 25 years, heading it. And he's behind the Library of Medicine and so many other things that we mentioned today. So people can have amazing influence beyond their clinical skill or their surgical skill. And I think my interaction with him, really, I mean, he was a role model in so many ways. He was probably the most organized before even computers were there, the way he interacted with patients and everything else. And I think his rounds were amazing. You could see all the cardiologists behind him, and he was probably the most effective. I have a question for you. If he was with us today, from your perspective, knowing him from a surgical perspective, what would he see as the future of cardiovascular surgery?
Quick answers. It's 9 o'clock. Dr. Maddox?
He would be at the lead of asking the questions. What is the intermediary metabolism of prostaglandins, and how do they affect clotting? He would be at the lead asking the questions, how do we benefit from artificial intelligence to our advantage? How do we reorganize the hospital and the medical school to make the technical people, cardiologists, interventional radiologists, surgeons, into a new technical group, and rather than having 3 different silos, have one unity. The schools and the hospitals are ready for a re-nomenclature of the taxonomy, and he would be at the lead of saying, what does that new unity look like? Amalgamating all of his international knowledge about how medicine is practiced in different locations. And he would be asking, what do we do with cancer? What do we do with the information in infectious disease, with cancer and vascular disease? And why do we have so many different approaches to peripheral vascular disease? He would go back to some of his roots and say, what happened to sympathectomy? Why can't we use that again? But that was just the way he brings up the question. But if it doesn't work, he's ready to abandon it and move to the next thing.
So Ken, I think I'm going to give you the last word on that since it's 9:01. I think, Robert, the verdict's in. It was not the craziest idea. It's a brilliant idea, and I think it worked very well.
Thank you for being such an effective and efficient. Thank you for being such an effective and efficient moderator, Alan. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Appreciate all the wisdom that we accumulated today from this fabulous panel. Thank you.
And let's all congratulate Dr. Jackson. He's the president-elect of the Harris County Medical Society. And
You know, Longfellow wrote a few poems. One of them was, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and in parting leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. The footprints of Dr. DeBakey are in this room, in this hospital, in this medical center. I think we should all strive to do our best and to make a footprint on the sand of time. We would all be hard put to top Dr. DeBakey, who really made this medical center in many ways.
Yeah, well, as I was told, when you drink from the well, think about the people who dug the well. I would say Dr. DeBakey dug the well, but the gentleman on the stage certainly made it a little bit deeper and more knowledgeable. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I'm very proud of you.